The police later told me the man who broke into my cabin had been living in the woods for weeks, watching people who stayed alone. What they didn't know was, he was already inside my cabin before I arrived, that it was a normal Friday afternoon, and I was finishing up my shift at a small diner in rural Vermont. I was 24 at the time, just a regular college graduate taking some time off before starting a new job. The day had been quiet, the kind of slow, uneventful day that makes you forget what time it is. Customers came and went. The smell of coffee and fried eggs filled the air, and I kept myself busy wiping tables and restocking the condiments. After my shift ended, I drove the usual 20 minutes to my little weekend cabin tucked away in the woods. It wasn't fancy, just a small wooden cabin with peeling paint, a single bedroom, and a wood stove, but it was perfect for escaping the city noise and spending a couple of days alone. I had planned a simple weekend, read a book, take a few walks in the forest, and maybe cook something decent for dinner. Nothing complicated. Nothing that should have gone wrong. As I pulled up the narrow gravel driveway, I noticed something strange. The snow on the path hadn't been disturbed by any tire tracks or footprints, even though I knew someone had been there earlier in the week to check the cabin. For a moment, I laughed at myself for imagining it, but the thought didn't entirely go away. Something about the untouched snow felt off. It was quiet in a way that felt too quiet, like the forest was holding its breath. I stepped out of my car, pulling my coat tight against the chill. The sun was already low, casting long shadows between the pine trees. Normally, I loved the way the late afternoon light made the forest glow gold, but that day, it made the trees seem taller, more menacing. The cabin itself looked normal, unchanged since the last time I'd been there, but when I unlocked the door and pushed it open, I had the strange feeling that someone or something had been inside before me. The first thing I noticed was that the firewood I had stacked neatly by the stove was slightly moved, almost as if someone had brushed past it in a hurry. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the wind shifted something, or a raccoon had gotten in through a loose panel. Still, there was an uneasy weight pressing on my chest, a small hint that my weekend alone might not be as peaceful as I'd expected. I turned on the lights and unpacked my bag, trying to shake off the feeling. Then I heard it, a faint creak above me. The cabin had an attic, but I hadn't planned on going up there. At first, I thought it was just the old wood settling, but the sound repeated, slow and deliberate, like footsteps pacing back and forth. My stomach sank. It was a normal day. My little cabin was supposed to be a safe place, my own quiet corner of the world. But something told me, even then, that I wasn't truly alone. And by the time the shadows in the forest began to stretch long and dark, I realized that feeling was the first warning of a night I would never forget. After leaving the diner, I drove along the narrow country road that led to my cabin. The forest on either side was dense and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice every sound, like the wind brushing through the pine needles or the occasional bird calling in the distance. The sun was setting, painting the sky in pale oranges and grays. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that makes you feel like you've stepped out of the real world and into a different one. The cabin itself was small, just enough for a weekend getaway. It had a single bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a wood-burning stove that gave off enough warmth to keep the place comfortable even in the cold. The walls were made of old pine, scratched and faded with age, and the floorboards creaked if you walked too fast. It wasn't modern, but I liked it that way. It felt real. Tangible, like a place where you could forget the world outside for a while. I had come here for a simple reason. I needed a break from the city, from work, from people. For 2 days, I planned to be completely alone, just me, a few books, and the forest. The idea was relaxing, almost therapeutic. I had packed groceries, a small supply of firewood, and my laptop in case I wanted to watch something or write a bit. There was no one else around. My friends had other plans, and I wanted this solitude. Once I stepped inside, I immediately felt at home. I set my bag down, checked the stove, and prepared a simple dinner. Outside, the forest was quiet, but not unnaturally so. Snow had begun to fall lightly, coating the roof and surrounding trees in a soft, white blanket. The kind of snow that muffles sound and makes everything seem peaceful. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat near the window, looking out over the snow-covered landscape. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have a place like this, a place so far removed from the constant noise and stress of everyday life. The air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke, the kind of smell that relaxes you without you even realizing it. Occasionally, I could hear small noises outside, a twig snapping under the weight of an animal, the soft rustle of a squirrel climbing a tree, but nothing alarming. As the evening wore on, I started a fire in the stove, the warmth filling the room and the gentle crackle providing a comforting rhythm. I made a mental note to lock all the doors and windows before heading to bed. Not because I feared anything in particular, but just a normal precaution. Everything seemed ordinary, normal. The kind of ordinary that makes you let your guard down. At that point, I had no idea that the first hints of something being wrong were already around me, waiting. By the time night fully settled in, the forest outside had become a solid wall of darkness. The wind had picked up slightly, brushing branches against the cabin walls. And somewhere hidden among the shadows, someone or something was already watching. After settling in for the evening, I tried to relax by the window with my coffee. The cabin was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels almost too perfect. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. But then I caught it, a shadow moving outside in the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but the trees and snow were still. I told myself it was nothing, just the way the fading light played against the branches. A few minutes later, I heard a faint noise from outside. It was soft, like someone stepping lightly on the snow. My stomach tightened. I pressed my ear to the door, listening, but there was nothing. Just the wind through the pines and the distant creak of old branches. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, just beyond the reach of the porch light. I went to the kitchen to get more firewood, and as I returned, I noticed the firewood I had stacked neatly by the stove was slightly shifted. Not much, just enough to make me pause. I stepped closer to inspect it, trying to rationalize it. Maybe the wood had settled, or a draft had knocked a piece over. But even as I convinced myself of that, I couldn't ignore the small sense of unease crawling up my spine. Later, when I went to grab a book from the shelf, I heard it again. A soft creak, like someone walking across the floor above me. The cabin didn't have an upper floor, just an attic space I never went into. I froze and held my breath. The noise stopped as suddenly as it started. My heart was beating faster, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was the old structure settling in the cold. Maybe it really was nothing. Then came the footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. Not random, not hurried like an animal. I could hear them crunching lightly in the snow around the cabin. I went to the window, careful to keep the curtains drawn just slightly, and try to see through the dim light. The snow made it hard to distinguish anything, but for a moment, I thought I saw a figure, a dark shape moving between the trees. I blinked, and it was gone. The more time passed, the more the cabin seemed to change. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind against the windows, felt intentional. My senses were on high alert. The feeling that something was off wasn't sudden. It was gradual, creeping into my mind with each small, unexplained sound. The forest outside, which had seemed so peaceful just hours before, now felt like it was closing in. By the time I decided to double-check the locks on the doors and windows, the sun had completely set, and the only light came from the fire and the flickering lantern. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like the forest itself was watching me. Every small noise, the snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, made my stomach knot. I knew then that this was no longer just a quiet weekend in the woods. Something was out there, lingering, waiting. By the time night fully fell, the forest outside was almost completely black, broken only by the weak glow of the cabin's lantern. I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that the noises I'd been hearing were just the natural sounds of the woods. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something wasn't right. It started with the knocks. At first, they were soft, almost imperceptible, like the wind tapping against the doorframe. Then they became sharper, heavier, deliberate. Someone or something was out there. I pressed my back against the door, heart pounding, and listened. The knock stopped for a few moments, then resumed, rhythmically, like someone testing the locks, trying to see if the cabin would give way. I moved to the window and peered through the glass, careful not to draw attention. The snow-covered trees created confusing shadows, but I thought I saw movement. A dark figure, tall and still, just beyond the edge of the light. My stomach tightened. I couldn't see a face, couldn't hear a voice, but the presence was undeniable. I felt watched, cornered, as if the forest itself was holding me in place. Then came the footsteps. Slow, methodical, circling the cabin. They crunched in the snow outside, and I could swear they were closer than a minute ago. I tried to listen for the wind, for any explanation, but the only sound I could hear was the approach of someone with intent. I felt trapped, every exit from the cabin now seeming like it led straight into danger. My hands shook as I grabbed a chair and wedged it against the door. I considered calling the police, but the signal was weak here. I was alone, isolated, and every minute I stayed inside made the cabin feel smaller, suffocating. My mind raced. What if they tried to force the door? What if they'd been watching me since I arrived? The rational part of me knew it could be imagination, but the instinctual fear in my gut was too strong to ignore. Suddenly, I heard a soft tapping at the back door. Someone was moving around the cabin, testing each potential point of entry. I didn't dare look directly, but I could see the faint shadows shifting in the lantern light. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of snow against the walls made me flinch. I wanted to hide, to run, to disappear, but the cold outside made the cabin feel like my only option, even if it wasn't safe. Then came the rustling in the attic. The cabin had a small, unused attic, but the floorboards above me gave way to sounds that were unmistakably human. Someone was above me, moving slowly, deliberately. My heart pounded as I realized the intruder could be inside without me even knowing. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as though the walls themselves were closing in. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't random. This wasn't just a person wandering by. This was someone actively targeting me, someone who knew I was alone. Every sense I had screamed at me that the danger was close, that the figure outside wasn't going to leave without trying to get in. The calm isolation I had felt hours ago was gone. I was trapped, and I could feel the threat pressing in from every direction. The first real confrontation happened just after midnight. I was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, clutching the chair I had wedged against the door. The knocking had stopped, replaced by heavy breathing outside. It was slow, steady, deliberate. I could hear each exhale, each footstep pressing against the snow. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst through my chest. Then I heard the doorknob jiggle. Someone was trying to force the door open. I shoved harder against the chair, but it shifted slightly under the pressure. I realized in that moment that it wouldn't hold for long. My mind scrambled for options. I could run out the back door, but I didn't know where the figure was. I could call 911, but the signal was weak, and every second felt like an eternity. Suddenly, the front door swung open with a loud crack. The figure stepped inside. I didn't get a good look at him at first, just a shadow, tall and moving fast. My instincts kicked in. I grabbed my jacket, my flashlight, and bolted toward the back door, trying to stay silent, trying not to trip in the dark. The intruder followed. I could hear footsteps behind me, quick and heavy, crunching against the wooden floorboards. I ran into the kitchen, grabbed a knife from the counter, not to fight, just to hold something, and burst through the back door into the snow. My feet sank into the cold, powdery ground. I could feel the forest pressing in on both sides, the trees dark and ominous. I didn't look back. Every instinct screamed at me to keep running, and I did. Branches whipped my face, snow got into my eyes, but I didn't stop. I heard shouting behind me. The intruder was right on my heels, but I didn't dare check. I stumbled down the small hill leading to the main road, my hands raw from pushing through brush and branches. Then, through the trees, I saw a faint light, a car driving slowly down the road. I waved my arms, screaming as loud as I could. The figure hesitated, then disappeared back into the trees. I collapsed near the car, shivering, unable to catch my breath. The driver stopped immediately, asking if I was okay. I explained as quickly as I could, my voice shaking. By the time the police arrived, the intruder was gone. They searched the surrounding woods but found nothing. No tracks, no sign he had left. Just the snow, untouched, and the evidence of what had happened inside the cabin. Even sitting in the safety of the patrol car, I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been watching the entire time, waiting for me to make a move. The cabin, once a place of peace, now felt like a trap, a memory of danger that wouldn't fade. It had lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. And I knew, deep down, that the person who had chased me through the snow could still be out there, waiting for someone else, somewhere in those dark woods. After the police left, I tried to process everything that had happened. I thought I was safe now, far away from the cabin and the dark forest. But then came the call from the local sheriff's department, and with it, a piece of information that made my blood run cold. They told me that the man who had broken into my cabin was not just some random drifter or burglar. He had been living in the woods for weeks, maybe months, moving from cabin to cabin, observing people who came to stay alone. He didn't just rob them, he watched. He studied their routines, learned their habits, and only made a move when he was certain the person would be isolated and vulnerable. The part that hit me the hardest? The intruder had a history of breaking into cabins specifically in this area. He had evaded capture multiple times. In some reports, he had been spotted hiding in attics or closets, sometimes even sleeping in cabins while the owners were out or asleep. People who had thought they were alone had been under his watch for hours, sometimes days. I remembered the subtle signs from that first night, the shifted firewood, the footsteps above the attic, the slow, deliberate knocks. At the time, I had tried to rationalize them, telling myself it was nothing. But in hindsight, every single one of those moments was him, watching me, tracking me, waiting for the right moment to strike. He had been inside the cabin, possibly even observing me as I unpacked my bag, reading my movements, calculating his plan. The sheriff also mentioned something even more disturbing. The intruder had a weapon. Not just for intimidation, a real, dangerous tool he used to threaten or trap his victims. It wasn't just a break-in, it was premeditated, organized. I hadn't realized how close I had come to something far worse. I went back in my memory, trying to place every sound, every shadow, every odd feeling I had that night. The creak of the attic boards, the rustle in the snow outside, the shifting of the firewood. All of it suddenly made sense. I hadn't imagined any of it. He had been there, inside the cabin, moving quietly, waiting for me to make a mistake. Even a moment when I ran to the back door, the figure outside, the sound of footsteps behind me, it wasn't random. He had tracked my escape, anticipating how I might flee, possibly planning to intercept me before I reached the road. I had been lucky, miraculously lucky. That revelation changed everything. The story of that night was no longer just about fear or isolation. It was about the reality that someone had been stalking me, learning my habits, and that my survival had been a matter of timing and instinct, not chance alone. For the first time, I realized that the danger wasn't abstract. It was real, personal. And he could be out there right now, doing the exact same thing to someone else, somewhere else in those forests, hiding, waiting, observing. Even weeks after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just nerves, the aftermath of a terrifying experience. But it wasn't. Small things kept happening. Shadows in the corner of my eye, the sound of footsteps in empty rooms, the sense that someone was there when no one should be. I avoided cabins, forests, and isolated roads for months. Friends invited me to weekend trips, and I always declined, citing work or other obligations. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about safety. It was the realization that he could be anywhere, that he could still be out there, watching, waiting for the right opportunity. The police had never caught him. In fact, they told me he had disappeared without a trace after the last reported break-ins. There were no leads, no sightings, nothing to suggest where he had gone. One night, I had a dream. I was back in the cabin, alone, and the shadows in the room began to move without explanation. I could hear soft, deliberate breathing just behind me. I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if I was awake or still dreaming. The fear felt real, tangible. And in that moment, I realized it didn't matter if he was gone or not. The fear had followed me home. Sometimes, when I drive at night along rural roads, I feel eyes on me. I glance in the rearview mirror, and the empty trees seem to form shapes that vanish when I look directly. I've even thought I saw someone in the shadows of a distant cabin, standing still, watching, waiting. My friends say I'm being paranoid, but I know the truth. He could be anywhere, silently observing, just like he did that night. I've thought about going back to the cabin, trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy, but I can't. I can't face the thought of the dark woods, the creaking floorboards, the possibility of encountering him again. And yet, the memory haunts me daily. The sound of the doorknob rattling, the crunch of snow outside, the shadowy figure in the window. I can still picture it all as clearly as the moment it happened. The most disturbing part is that I still don't know who he really was. He had no obvious motive, no connection to me personally. He had simply chosen me because I was alone. And that means he could choose someone else tomorrow, or even tonight. The thought is unbearable, yet I can't stop imagining it. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I swear I hear a soft creak outside my door, or the faintest rustle in the hallway. My rational mind knows it's probably nothing, but the memory of that night in the cabin tells me differently. There's a part of me that wonders, what if he's still out there? What if he's watching someone else right now, plotting his next move in the dark? And the scariest part of all? I'll never know. I may never know. The police never caught him. And sometimes, late at night, I still wonder if he stopped stalking cabins, or if he just learned to hide better.